Remainder marks. What are they? Why are they? I don't know. We're going to try and take a look at that now. I'm Gary Lovisi, and remainder marks are marks put on books to indicate that they haven't sold. And what happens is a lot of times books don't sell, and they have to be returned to the publisher for credit. And the remainder mark indicates that this is a book that hasn't been sold, so the book is marked so that it can't be returned again later at another time or used at another time to get credit twice. What happened is in the early times of paperback publishing, in the 40s and 50s, they were able to sell basically everything. Pocketbooks, Avon, Gold Medal, Ace. They could sell pretty much all their books that they put out. And each month they put out new books. And each month there was a lot of more competition as time went on. Eventually, though, there was a time when, because of the competition, the market grew so big that there was a glut on the market of paperbacks, and the books had to be returned to the distributor that would go back to the publisher. And then the publisher would take the books back. They'd give credit to the bookstore or the newsstand, and then they would use the books. They would sell them, discount them, or they would. Some of them were used as ballast in ships for World War II that they sent to England. Others were just dumped and thrown away. But some of them were resold or whatever. So if they resold them at a discount, they had the remainder mark on them so that book could not be then returned, like boxes of books returned. The publisher wouldn't take them. And they said, we will not take them back. And this is also similar what went on with comic books and pulp magazines and magazines. You'll see on sometimes magazines and comic books, they have some of the titles are cut out of the covers because those are returned sometimes for credit that if they weren't sold. So each month, what happened? You had a publisher that was putting out books, and that's why the paperback books were always marked with a month and a year date, so that those books of that month that didn't sell, they would be given to the distributor to go back to the publisher, and they would get credit for those books. And then the bookstore or the newsstand or whatever would get the new books for that month. And like I say, early on, it was fine because they were basically selling everything that they could get their hands on, and it was really doing good. But eventually, what happened is that the books were there was a lot of competition. There were a lot of books published, and not all of them sold, so that they had to be returned to publishers. Publishers marked these books, and they sold them. A lot of them were sold in England and other places. So the thing is that the publisher did not want to give credit for any books twice. If they would give credit for unsold books to bookstores and newsstands, and that was the way that they wanted to get them to take their books. So that was like the kind of deal that they made. It's like, you'll take our books, and we'll give you credit for the ones that don't sell. So they say, okay, so you mean we're just selling what we sell? We're making profit, and if they don't sell, we send them back, we get credit, and we get the next books for next month, and we sell those. So that's a good deal for the seller, the bookstore, or the newsstand, and it's a good deal for the publisher to get their books distributed more widely in more and more outlets. That's what they wanted to do. Sleaze books also had the same situation. They had certain marks, remainder marks that were put on the books. And I'm going to show you a couple of them now. These are books from the 60s, and this is a Playtime book. That's not a Playtime book. It's a yes, it is. It is a Playtime book. Sorry. And what they had was a saw cut. They actually cut the top edge of the book with a saw to indicate that it was a remainder, so it was not to be sold, not to be resold, not to be returned. I'm sorry, not to be returned to the publisher. The publisher would not take this book back because they say, no, we already gave credit for this book. It's a remainder. You can sell it to somebody else, whatever, for 5 cents, 10 cents, give it away, throw it away, do whatever you want, but we're not taking it back. Same thing with Cozy Book. This is Marie. They put a star. That's their remainder mark. Now the stars, these were put on by the distributor. So you had different distributors. They used different marks. But this is just to give you an idea, general idea of it. So they put a star on it, indicate that it's a remainder. Okay, this is the sleeves books. The one that was most common was the hole punch. And you can see here, there's a hole punch. Sometimes there was 2 or 3, but there was always at least 1 hole punch in the cover, and that to indicate that it's a remainder. And the interesting thing is that you'll see distributors and salesmen often for not only sleeves publishers, but Ace Books, Ballantine, Dorr, all this, the science fiction lines, the mystery paperback lines, all of them had, those salesmen were given cover proofs by the publisher for books that were forthcoming. And the cover proof is the whole, of course, it's the whole cover, of what you would have, plus larger, because these are trimmed when they're bound to the book. So the cover proof is the whole cover, front and back and spine, and it's about this size. But the thing with the cover proof is they would give these cover proofs out to bookstores and to newsstands and stuff to advertise new books. We have a new book, science fiction book. We have a new mystery novel by some such and such that's coming out. Here's the cover proof. All the cover proofs were also hole punched because they did not want those cover proofs to go back to the publisher as asking for returns and credit. At first what people would do is they take a cover proof before, if it wasn't punched, they'd rip it and just return the cover. Because eventually what happened with paperback books, especially in the 70s and 80s, was there was so many paperbacks being published and so many that were not selling, and there were so many that were coming into the stores, and they were picking up so many that the publisher says, oh, wait, we can't take all this stuff back. It's just too much. And the books were, you see these books that are slim, maybe a quarter, 3/8 of an inch in size. The books in the 60s, 70s, and 80s especially were big, thick, heavy tomes. So the publisher says, look, we don't want them all back. We can't handle it. We can't deal with it. We have enough trouble taking back the hardcover books, which I'm going to get to in a minute. So this is like, just strip off the cover. Rip the cover off and send us the covers back. Keep the guts, which was called the guts of the book, and do whatever you want with it. Throw it away, sell it, but just throw it away. It's garbage. You can't sell it. It's got no cover. And we'll give you credit for the covers that you send back to us. And that's what happened. Eventually what happened is, like at flea markets and stuff, a lot of these books with no covers turned up, and people were selling them for 25 cents or something, or 10 cents, which you weren't supposed to do because that's really kind of illegal. But that did happen, and you'll even see sometimes it's mentioned in books, don't buy any books that have no covers on them, because they were already returned for credit. Hardcovers were a little different because there was some value in hardcovers. We're talking about paperbacks, which were kind of disposable books, disposable and cheaper. They were 25 cents, 50 cents, whatever, but hardcover books were $5, $10, $25 or whatever. So that the publisher did want these back, and they wanted to resell them. But again, they had to do a remainder mark to show that they were giving credit to the bookstores for these. Most of these, of course, came from, were sent to and came returned from bookstores. So they had to have something to indicate it. A lot of times what they would do would they would take a black or red magic marker and just write all over the pages here, write all over like that. You see some books like that, and they look terrible. They're just defaced. And eventually the publishers realized, you know what, we're getting these books back, and it's a nice book. We could sell this book for, put it on discount at Barnes & Noble or something for $5 or $10, make some money, make some of our money back. But if it's all like written all over, magic marker all over the place, nobody's going to want to buy it. It's going to look terrible. So our remainder mark will have to be something different. So they did something, they would just put usually the dot, they would put a little red or a black dot. But usually the dot is on the bottom because it's less obtrusive. Or sometimes they'd put a little star or some other little figure that would just indicate, a small little figure, just indicate that it's a remaindered book. And that would be like a book that, okay, it's a remainder, and then they'd sell them to Barnes & Noble, or in the old days, Walden's or B. Dalton's, or any of those book chains, and others, for $1 a book, and then the stores would sell them for $5 or something. But at least they would recoup. They'd get rid of some of the inventory. They would recoup the some of what they spent. So that's what remainders. The whole thing was to ensure the publisher that they were not paying twice for a return on a book that wasn't sold. They wanted to make sure that their returns were controlled, and that there wasn't any shenanigans going on. Interesting thing that I remember in the 70s, and this was reported in Locus magazine, certain, shall we say, organized crime had gotten wind of this thing about, covers being stripped off and returned to publishers for credit. So they actually set up some bogus businesses. They got printers to print up covers, not these are sleaze books, but on regular Bantam, Avon, or Ace Books, or whatever, legitimate mainstream publishers. And they would print up bogus covers and have them just ripped, and they would send them in for credit, and they would get paid because that store says we didn't sell these books, we were returning these for credit. And they would get that money or that credit. And so the publishers were very leery of always having to do with returns, but they didn't have a choice, because that's how they wanted to. That's how they had to get their product out into as many outlets as possible. That was the key ingredient in selling, especially paperback books, was the distribution of them, getting them distributed into all kinds of outlets, even outlets that had been non-traditional book-selling outlets. And to get them to take the books, you had to make a deal with them and say, look, okay, take our books, sell them. The ones that you sell, you pay for. The ones that don't sell, you can return to us next month. Give it to the truck driver. He'll take them back. He'll get credit from the distributor and through the publisher for those books that didn't sell. And you can continue getting new books every month. And this is what continued. And it was a good process. It was a very good process. It was the mass market system of distribution that was started by Robert de Graaf in 1939 with pocketbooks, and it continued for a decade or two very well, because books were selling like crazy, and there weren't that many returns because people were buying books, and they were cheap. They were 25 cents. But eventually what happened is, just like everything else, it's a good thing. A lot of other publishers were getting into the business. Fly-by-night operations were getting into the business. Sleaze publishers were getting into the business, selling So there's all these books, and at a certain point, there wasn't enough of a buying public to handle all of the books that were available. So books were being returned, and eventually, as I said, in the 70s and 80s, they just said, we don't even want the books back. Just rip the covers off and send the cover back to us, and we'll give you credit for the book, and just destroy the books. And that's basically the story with Remainders. Remainders were the value of Remainders. That's another thing. They're looked at as by collectors as being a little less valuable. A hardcover book with a remainder mark, depending on how obtrusive it is, if it's really, really bad, it could bring down the value of a book. If it's just a little dot here, or if it's a dot on the bottom, it might not be such a problem, but it will probably be a sticking point with some collectors and dealers where they will lower the value of the book. With paperback books, depending on what the condition of the book, and what the book is, the punch hole, the saw cut, or the stamp, remainder stamp that's on the book, sometimes bring down the value of the book. A lot of collectors would rather have books without these markings on them, which they consider as defacing the book. That might be a moot point, because since this isn't really defacing the book in the sense that this was a thing that was done by the publisher, so it's actually part of the book. But again, people prefer to have books without punch holes or saw cuts or stickers or magic marker indications on them. So usually it does bring down the value of the book. It's always something that should be mentioned in or at least shown in if you have such a book on eBay, at least show the cover of the book so that you can see that there's a saw cut, or mention that there's a hole, punch hole, mention that it's a remainder and it has a remainder mark, even if it's a small unintrusive one. That should be mentioned, and that should be an indication of that the book is worth a little bit less than if it didn't have that. A lot of collectors look at it as the book has been somewhat defaced, but you could also say that it was done by the publisher, so it's a part of the book. I hope you enjoyed this look at remainder marks. I think they're an interesting aspect of the hobby and of books. A lot of times there's a lot of little things that books have on them that indicate little codes that publishers do, and remainder mark is just one of those indications. So if you enjoyed this little video, give us a thumbs up and a like, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for looking.